All right, so today we're diving into some pretty murky waters, the kind that have been swirling with debate and intrigue for centuries.
Murky is right. We're talking about the origins of Islam.
And just to be clear, we're putting on our historian hats today, not looking to step on any toes.
Exactly. We're talking historical evidence and analysis.
Think of it like we're Indiana Jones, but instead of hunting for lost relics, we're digging into ancient texts.
And maybe dodging a few poisoned arrows of controversy along the way.
Well, hopefully we can avoid those. Speaking of controversy, our deep dive today is taking us straight into, did Muhammad exist?
Ah, yes. Robert Spencer's book, a real page-turner.
It definitely throws some curveballs and makes you rethink what you thought you knew.
It definitely throws a wrench into traditional narratives, that's for sure.
Okay, so Spencer throws out this question that seems pretty straightforward at first glance.
Okay, shoot.
If Muhammad was this influential leader shaping history, where's the concrete proof from his actual lifetime?
And he's not just talking about any time period. He's particularly interested in those years right after the Arab conquests.
You'd think a figure like that, leaving that kind of legacy, would have left a pretty big mark on the historical record.
Precisely. And yet, the evidence we might expect, it's not exactly abundant. Take Mecca, for instance.
The heart of Islam.
Exactly. You'd expect inscriptions, texts, something concrete dating back to Muhammad's time, mentioning him, his teachings, even the Quran.
But those are pretty hard to come by.
To put it mildly, that absence, especially given Mecca's importance, is a pretty big deal for historians.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces just don't quite fit.
And then you have these accounts from people who lived through it all.
Like who?
Sophronius, the Christian bishop, for one, he saw the Arab conquest of Jerusalem firsthand, even wrote about it. Well, he doesn't paint a very rosy picture. He talks about the destruction, the violence, even refers to the Arab leader, not by name, but as a false prophet, a devil.
Which doesn't exactly scream peaceful spread of Islam, does it?
Not quite. And then there's the curious case of the inscriptions.
MHMT.
Yeah, scholars have found these inscriptions scattered around, and they're vague.
Vague how?
They don't exactly present this figure as a clear-cut prophet. Sometimes he's a leader, sometimes a king, sometimes even just a merchant.
So we're left wondering, is this actually Muhammad we're talking about?
It's the million-dollar question. Are these fragmented mentions talking about the Prophet Muhammad?
Or are we talking about somebody or something completely different?
Exactly. And that ambiguity really throws a wrench into things. It makes you question when that image of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam as we know him today, actually solidified.
And speaking of things that make you go, let's talk about the Quran itself.
Right, the Quran. Even when you look at the text itself through a historical lens, there are some head scratchers.
Like what?
Well, take the Dome of the Rock inscriptions, for example.
Those are important for Islamic history. Right?
Hugely. They're the earliest undisputed example of Islamic faith we found. Verses from the Quran, a clear declaration of Muhammad as God's messenger.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
Except for one tiny detail. These inscriptions are dated to 691 CE, which is decades after the traditional date for the Quran's revelation.
Wait, hold up. So if the Quran was revealed decades earlier, why the late arrival to the party?
Exactly. It's a discrepancy that's got historians scratching their heads.
That's quite the head scratcher. It'd be like finding a first edition Shakespeare play, but it was dated a century after Shakespeare died.
A very astute observation. And it doesn't stop there. Get this, they found early Islamic coins featuring Christian and Zoroastrian imagery.
Which seems a little off-brand for a religion that's not exactly known for being cool with public displays of other faiths.
That's one way to put it. And then there's Dan Gibson's work on early mosques. He found that many of them weren't facing Mecca.
Wait, what?
You heard that right. They were facing Petra. It's almost as if the center of the Islamic world, at least geographically speaking, wasn't always fixed on Mecca.
It's like finding out your compass points south instead of north. Makes you rethink everything.
It does make you wonder, how does that transition happen?
And why?
Exactly.
And here's another thing about Mecca. Islamic tradition, it paints this picture of Mecca as a bustling trade hub, right?
Yeah, it's a central hub.
But here's the thing, there's no mention of Mecca as this major trading center in any source before the 8th century.
That lack of external evidence is definitely eyebrow-raising.
It's like it just appeared out of nowhere.
It does make you wonder if perhaps the significance of Mecca, especially its connection to Muhammad, might have been, shall we say, enhanced a bit over time.
So it's like finding out your favorite band's origin story about meeting in a magical music store is just, well, a really good story.
You could say that.
And it's not just about Mecca popping up out of nowhere. The way Mecca is described, it's like this lush paradise.
An oasis in the desert.
Right, but anyone who's seen a picture knows that Mecca is, well, let's just say it's not exactly known for its lush gardens.
To put it mildly, this romanticized image has led some scholars to question if other parts of the Prophet's life story might have been, how shall we say, creatively interpreted over time.
Okay, so we're talking about the possibility that the Muhammad story, as it's been passed down, might be more legend than literal history.
It's a sensitive topic, for sure. But before anyone accuses us of peddling conspiracy theories, it's worth remembering that stories, especially when passed down through generations, they change.
They evolve.
Exactly.
And when it comes to Muhammad's life, we're talking about a lot of stories.
We are indeed. And that's where the hadiths come in, those collections of sayings and stories about Muhammad's life. And that's where the hadiths come in, those collections of sayings and stories about Muhammad's life. When you start digging into those...
Because they're supposed to be like the most reliable source, right? After the Quran.
Well, that's what makes it so interesting. When you really start examining them, comparing different accounts, it's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. Keep going.
It's like some of the pieces were carved by different artists. They might look like they fit together, but the bigger picture feels a bit, well...
a little jumbled.
To put it mildly. There are contradictions, inconsistencies, even hadiths that scholars have flagged as later additions or outright fabrications.
So we've got these potential embellishments with Mecca, gaps in the historical record, and now conflicting accounts in the hadiths. It makes you wonder, did someone somewhere down the line decide to give their prophet a bit of a, let's say, legendary backstory?
It's not as far-fetched as it might sound. Think about it. The Arab Empire, it was expanding rapidly during this period. They're conquering vast territories, different cultures, different beliefs. They needed something to unify all these disparate groups, something more powerful than just military might.
A shared history, a common identity.
Exactly. And what better unifying figure than a divinely inspired prophet chosen by God to lead a new religion destined for greatness?
Okay, so bear with me here. You're suggesting that they needed a Muhammad even if they had to, well, get a little creative with the details.
It's a bold claim, no doubt. But think about it. It would explain why there are so many discrepancies, contradictions, and suspiciously convenient narratives in the traditional biography of Muhammad.
Like those inconsistencies in the hadiths, those gaps in the historical record.
Precisely. Imagine those early chroniclers. They're not just writing history, they're crafting an identity. They're like skilled weavers, carefully selecting the threads that best fit the grand tapestry they're creating. And sometimes, to make it all work, they might need to adjust the loom a little.
That's a pretty vivid image.
It helps to visualize it, because we're talking about a time when history, religion, and politics, they were all intertwined. So if we're entertaining this idea, even for a moment, of a somewhat fabricated Muhammad, where did they get the source material? Was there an actual person, a historical figure, who inspired the legend?
Good question. Because you don't just pull a prophet out of thin air, right? Or do you?
Right. That's where it gets really interesting. Remember those vague inscriptions we talked about earlier?
The ones that could be referring to anyone.
Exactly. Some scholars believe those fragments, those whispers from the past, might hold the key. What if those inscriptions or other forgotten figures served as a foundation?
A starting point, a blank canvas they could then use to craft the image of the prophet.
Exactly. Think of it like this. They had a historical sketch, rough outlines, and they filled in the blanks, adding details that suited their purpose.
So it's not so much inventing a prophet from scratch, but more like sculpting a figure over time, adding clay here, chiseling away there.
A very apt analogy. And that process That constant shaping and reshaping, incorporating new ideas, adjusting to new realities, it would explain why there are so many variations and inconsistencies in the traditional narrative. It's a story that's been told and retold, modified and embellished by different people with different perspectives, different goals.
Which brings us back to the Quran. If we entertain, even for a moment, that Muhammad's story might be more legend than literal history, what does that say about the Quran's origins? Could it too have been compiled much later than traditionally believed?
It's a question that sparked more than a few heated debates, and frankly, it makes some people uncomfortable. Because if the Quran is meant to be this perfect, unchanging divine revelation, then how do you explain the multiple versions?
The conflicting readings, the missing verses, all that.
Exactly. It does make you wonder, is it possible that it's more of an anthology? A collection of writings gathered and organized over an extended period, rather than one singular divine decree.
And if that's the case, then who made those decisions about what went in, what was left out, and why?
Now you're asking the really big questions. If we approach the Quran from this perspective, as a text that evolved over time, its formation becomes inseparable from the political and social upheavals of that era. Imagine those early compilers. They weren't just grappling with fragments of scripture. They were wrestling with the very identity of a burgeoning empire.
So instead of a sudden divine download, we're talking about a gradual human process of assembling the Quran, a collection of materials that were debated, edited, maybe even redacted to fit a specific agenda.
That's what some scholars are suggesting. And that's where things get really interesting. Because they're also suggesting that the Quran might not be solely based on Arabic sources, that there might be influences from other texts, other traditions woven into it.
Okay, now we're getting into some uncharted territory. If the Quran wasn't revealed in its entirety, but rather assembled and shaped over time, what kind of influences are we talking about?
That's where we'll pick up after a quick break. Because to understand the Quran's evolution, we need to talk about the work of scholars like Christoph Luxenberg and Gerd Arpuin.
And what did these scholars uncover?
Well, they suggest that to understand the Quran's earliest forms, we need to look beyond Arabic and delve into Syriac, a language widely used in the region during the time of the Quran's emergence.
Okay, so Syriac. We're going deep into the linguistic weeds now. I gotta admit, this is way more interesting than those grammar lessons I slept through in school. But why Syriac? What's the connection to the Quran?
Well, you see, Syriac was like the lingua franca back then, kind of like English is today. It was used in commerce, literature, even religious texts across different communities in the region. And this is where it gets really interesting. Scholars like Luxemburg, they're suggesting that the Quran, particularly its poetry and hymns, might have borrowed heavily from Syriac Christian liturgical texts.
Hold on. So you're telling me that the Quran, the holy book of Islam, might have been influenced by Christian writings? That's quite the claim.
It's definitely a bold statement. But Luxemburg isn't just throwing out theories without any evidence. He backs it up with some pretty compelling linguistic analysis. He points to specific words, phrases, even grammatical structures in the Quran that have striking similarities to Syriac Christian texts.
It'd be like finding out that your favorite pop song was actually inspired by a centuries-old Gregorian chant. Talk about a remix. Do you have any specific examples from Luxemburg's work?
Oh, absolutely. One of those fascinating examples is his interpretation of the word houris.
Houris. Refresh my memory. What was that one again?
The houris are often described as these beautiful virgins promised to the faithful as a reward in paradise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the whole streets paved with gold and beautiful companions imagery.
Ah, right. So what's Luxemburg's take on it? Does he say those interpretations are off base?
Well, he digs into the etymology of the word, traces it back to its roots in Syriac. And guess what he finds?
What? Don't leave me hanging.
He argues that the word houris, in its original context, might not refer to beautiful maidens at all. He suggests it might actually refer to white raisins.
White raisins. So we're not talking about eternal bliss with heavenly companions. We're talking about dried fruit.
Hey, white raisins were a valuable commodity back then, a true delicacy. But in all seriousness, Luxemburg's point is that if you don't understand the historical and linguistic context, you can end up with some wildly different interpretations.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So it's not just about questioning the traditional narrative of the Quran's origins, it's about understanding the broader world in which it emerged, all the cultural and linguistic cross-pollination happening at the time.
You hit the nail on the head. The Quran, like any sacred text, didn't emerge in a vacuum. It It was shaped by its historical context, influenced by the languages, the beliefs, the literature of the time. And by acknowledging those influences, we can gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of its message.
It's like that saying, context is everything. We can't just parachute into the 7th century, read the Quran with a 21st century mindset, and expect to fully grasp its meaning. We have to immerse ourselves in that world, understand the conversations that were happening, the ideas that were circulating.
Well said. It's about appreciating the Quran's complexity, its richness. Because when we dig deeper, when we challenge our assumptions, when we're open to new perspectives, we open ourselves up to a deeper engagement with the text itself.
And isn't that the whole point of, well, everything? To keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring those gray areas.
Precisely. It's about embracing the journey, the ongoing quest for knowledge and understanding.
That's a great note to end on. A huge thank you to our expert for joining us on this deep dive into the origins of Islam. And to our listeners, remember, the most important journey is often the one that takes us beyond our comfort zones, forcing us to confront our assumptions and embrace the unknown. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.